So now we're going to start with a manual profile and actually do some roasting. On our main screen, I'm going to select the manual roasting and the machine will start its preheating function. We're going to look at our initial settings here that we start with at the start of the roast. Today, I'm going to be selecting our hot air at 10, halogen at 10, drum heater at 2, and I'm going to select our bean agitation at 6. These are settings that I've used for this batch of coffee, which is a washed Colombian coffee, 500 gram batch. And after roasting on this roaster before, I know that these settings are good for how I like to roast and for my approach to roasting. Basically, we're going to be having more energy at the start with a lower agitation, and then we're going to slowly increase our agitation and slowly decrease our energy input. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we start roasting, but this is going to be our initial settings for the roast of this coffee. I'm going to be starting today with the target internal temperature of 170 degrees. So now our preheating is complete. We're going to load our green coffee into the hopper. And we're simply going to press start. This notification here is a warning that you're entering manual mode and not to leave the roaster. When we press OK, the roaster is going to load. The beans are going down into the drum, which you can see here, and it's going to take 15 seconds for that door to be open in order to make sure all the beans are down. Then it's going to automatically close and our roasting is starting. So from those initial settings that we had at the start from the previous screen, these are what is going to be starting here at the bottom, and you're going to see these come in. 10 for both the hot air and the halogen, 6 for our agitation, and 2 for our drum surface. So our drum heater, we're going to want to leave that for 2 for the whole roast to create a nice stable environment for the coffee roasting. For the agitation, starting at 6 for a 500 gram batch is really quite a good starting point for me. If you have a larger batch size, potentially you want to go a little bit higher, or if you have a lower batch size, you can go a little bit lower. But we're going to start here so that the bean surface, so that the bean mass is rotating and getting still some contact with the drum. So we have a little bit more conduction energy than we do convection. As the roast goes on, we're going to increase that one. For the halogen, I like to roast with my halogen at full at the start of the roast. We want to maximize this amazing radiation energy. This is an interesting way of roasting, and the Stronghold really captures it very well. It's going to pierce through the surface of the beans a little better than the other types of energy, and we're going to end up with a really sweet coffee if we use this radiation right. This coffee, being a wash coffee, is going to be okay to leave that radiation for higher for a little longer, but otherwise we do want to reduce that radiation towards the end. As the beans are starting to brown, we want to make sure that our radiation is all the way down. So we do lower our halogen down to 0 by the end of the roast. And for the hot air, I like to use a roasting style where we have the maximum amount of heat at the start of the roast and then slowly taper that down. With the halogen, we can do it in steps of 1. For example, now I'm going to be starting the lowering of this. But with our hot air, we only want to reduce that by 0.5 at a time. It has a much bigger impact if we reduce the hot air than if we're reducing the halogen. Up the top here, we have all of our measurements for what we're currently seeing inside of the drum. The yellow line is the drum surface. The red line, the hot air measured up the top before the air comes into the drum. And we have our blue line, which is the IR sensor, only on the S7X. And the white line is the 6mm probe, which is giving our bean temperature from the probe, not from the sensor. So it's a little bit slower to react and behaves a little bit more like you would see on a traditional roaster. I'm going to continue to lower the halogen here and increase our bean agitation. You can start to see a little bit of chaff coming off of the beans now, which is the indicator for me that I do want to start to go a little bit lower with my halogen and make that step to increase the bean agitation. As the hot air does most of the work, I'm going to leave that at higher for a little bit longer. And for a filter roast, ideally I'm looking around a 9 or 10 minute roast time. We can see here in the blue the rate of rise, or our ROR, of our IR probe, and in white the ROR of our internal probe. These are great ways to track what's happening off of the bean temperature and the IR bean surface temperature through the declining, hopefully, rate of rise. So we can see up here the effect on the hot air temperature. It's starting to level off of having it at 10. I'm going to start to reduce that now just down to 9.5 in order to let our roast peter out and flatten a little bit as we get towards first crack. And I'm going to continue to lower our halogen. It's my opinion that as we are lowering halogen, as the beans get darker, it's better off. Once those beans are darker, we're going to have more softness, so it's going to absorb that energy quicker. So we do want to lower it, but also it's going to become darker in color, which is going to absorb any of that light more easily. So for that reason, we try and reduce our halogen as we're going through the roast. And again, I prefer to make these in steps of whole numbers for the halogen and half numbers for the hot air. We're going to increase our bean agitation again now. And the way that I like to think about bean agitation is we're moving that mass around. So if we increase our agitation, we're actually going to allow more airflow to come through that bean mass, changing our energy style from conduction to convection. And so now we're essentially at a point where we have very little radiation or no radiation. We have a lot more convection, and we keep our hot air high, and we're continuing to increase our bean agitation. My halogen is down to 0 now, so we're no longer having that effect of the halogen lamp. The agitation is at 9, so it's moving almost as fast as it can, creating more passages for that air to come through, and also assisting as we come in towards first crack to clear any smoke or stuff that comes off of the coffee. I'm going to be slowly reducing my hot air, and we should see the hot air reading start to get lower, so that when we go into first crack, we're not going to go too hot too soon. We've got our first crack button down here, which I'm going to be marking when I hear it soon. I can start to hear the occasional crack. This normally happens around 171 degrees or so. And for me, I like to have a development time around 45 seconds or so for a filter roast. Oh, we've just hit first crack. And I normally like to use an increase in temperature from first crack to the release temperature of around 3 degrees. So meaning if we had our first crack at 172.4, then maybe we're dropping at 175.4, something like this, give or take. I'm going to continue to reduce the hot air, and in a moment I'll press release and the coffee will be released into the cooling bin here. So that's 45, let's release. So that was our first roast in manual mode of this coffee, this washed Colombian coffee. We've done everything in manual with no reference behind it, but through understanding the machine, you can get to see how it works. And I find that we can get some really great results following a sort of template, just like how I did. We're starting hot, slowly reducing that halogen, slowly reducing the hot air, but only by 0.5 increments, starting with lower agitation and increasing that agitation as we go. And then we can get a coffee that's quite light roasted, but well developed, especially through this radiation that we're getting from the S7X. Now it's been 45 seconds since that roast, and we're going to see this screen here becomes unlocked. This chute will be open for 45 seconds to remove all of the coffee from the drum, and then it becomes unlocked. Here we have three options that we can do. We can review the roast profile, go back to the main screen, or repeat the roasting. If we review the roast profile, we can see exactly what just happened. If we decide that this coffee and this profile was exactly what we wanted, then we can star it from this screen and save it to that favorites menu. And we can always zoom in and have a look at what's happening at each point in the coffee. You can even select just by tapping and see more information about what's happening at what point in the curve. If we want to repeat our roasting, we can do this and it'll use those same settings that we used for that profile that we just did. In order to release the beans here, we're going to take a vessel underneath here and simply pull on this lever. Then all you have to do is push that back in, and to turn off the blower and the agitation arm in the cooling basket, you just tap that icon. So, this is how we did a manual roast on the Stronghold S7X from start to finish.